Hey everyone, I'm Phil Albertelli, and this is The Week in Doubt, a podcast for atheists, agnostics, and whomever. And it's been a while, and so I thought, why not do a news story episode? It's about time. So up first, we have a story I became aware of earlier in the week, and before I play the clip, I'll very quickly read just a little bit from this Right Wing Watch article, and I notice Right Wing Watch seems to have rebranded a bit. It's now called people4.org. But anyway, the story is dated March 25th, and it's entitled, Christian Nationalists Call on the Government to Seize, quote-unquote, Wicked Apostate Churches. And it begins on the most recent episode of the Right Response Ministries podcast. Radical Christian nationalist pastor Joel Webbin and his co-hosts advocated for the government to literally seize control of churches that do not share their far-right theology. It's the latest bit of evidence that they view core American values like religious liberty and religious pluralism as nothing more than roadblocks to be dismantled as they impose their Christian nationalist vision on the U.S. And so now I'll play the clip. And I like to give credit where credit is due, so I found out about this story because I came across a Jesse Dollemore video in my YouTube feed, and he was discussing the story, and he played a clip from this far-right Christian podcast, and so that's where I harvested, or should I say pilfered, the clip from.
You can map it out. Like, all right, we got 57,000 buildings to take over. Within those 50,000, 7,000, millions of people to convince, tons of ministers. Like, that's decades of work. Or, hear me out. Hear me out.
I'm ready.
The president, the sovereign, the magistrate, Baron Trump, he comes out and he says,
the king.
I've taken a task force. We've gone through every website. We've driven by every building. And we have logged thousands of churches with pride flags out front. Women on the clergy. And there are soldiers on the street now. We are taking their property and we are giving it to the faithful churches in town.
Amen. Love it.
That is completely, historically, within the realm of the magistrate. Mm-hmm. He can do that. You are an apostate, wicked church.
That's
and
right.
your building, your land, your heritage is taken from you.
For the civil magistrate, even in our American system, to say your property is seized and you're out on the street would be glorious.
And that's kindness.
That
you're out on the street, you're taking your property
instead
out
of jail
is
or the
moderate, soft position.
That is the
and
moderate
that is a
position.
united.
So there's so much to unpack or tackle in that relatively short clip. And when I first watched it, I found it so unabashedly brazen and offensive that I wondered if maybe it was just rage bait. But I suppose the two aren't mutually exclusive. This could be an accurate reflection of their sincere, far-right Christian fundamentalist beliefs. And at the same time, they might also enjoy knowing they're getting under the skin of secular types like myself, people who value the principle of the separation of church and state. And I'm sure they're also aware that saying inflammatory or controversial stuff that's going to get people worked up can be a good or effective way of garnering attention and raising your profile. Case in point, you have high-profile people on the left like Jesse Dollemore covering it, which I think is a good thing. Even if they want the attention, it's still good to shine a light on this kind of stuff and make people aware that it's out there. Especially in a time like this, where, I've talked about Project 2025 on the show, and how in some regards you could say it kind of looks like the far-right Christian types have been winning to some degree. And I think the least we can do is to try to raise awareness of this crap and do our part to try to push back against it a bit, which is what I'm trying to do now. And so they talk about a kind of hypothetical or future magistrate or president, and it seems like they might be half joking, but they also mention a king, perhaps, maybe specifically Baron Trump. And this hypothetical monarch or magistrate would, in their opinion, rightfully be able to order the seizure of goods or property of churches they don't approve of, churches that have that are supportive of the LGBTQ community, or that maybe have female members of the clergy, that they would just take that property and redistribute it to churches they deem worthy or valid. And you can tell there's a certain kind of sadistic joy they take in, laying out this fantasy. The cruelty is the point, as they say. You'd be lucky to just be have your stuff taken and thrown out in the street. And you might have missed it because one of them says it quickly that, you're lucky you're not getting the guillotine. And this reminds me of a trend we've been seeing for a while now, especially of late, the alarming rise of a very kind of ugly or concerning strain of Christianity, an authoritarian, dare I say, fascistic strain, that seems spiked with a spirit of cruelty. And it seems antithetical to Christian principles. But of late, we've even been hearing, certain far-right Christians talk about empathy as if it's a bad thing, waging or war on or denouncing empathy as something that's kind of toxic to Western culture. That's a kind of a sign of weakness. And just to offer some quick examples, here's some headlines. The New York Times, dated February 13th, "Behold the strange spectacle of Christians against empathy." And then publicorthodoxy.org, "Trump, Musk in the war on empathy." And that's actually, as the name of the site implies, an Orthodox Christian site. And in the article, it goes into the role that empathy has played in the history of Christianity, such as helping to establish hospitals, etc. Then NPR from March 22nd, "How empathy came to be seen as a weakness. There's a growing movement among some conservatives pushing back against traditional notions of empathy." And then Baptist News Global, and this is just 5 days ago, I'm recording this on April 6th. "Here's who's behind the war on empathy. For Doug Wilson, empathy is idolatry." And I just looked it up, and yes, it's the same Doug Wilson who had debated the late great Christopher Hitchens. They had these really heated debates. I think at least one of their debates was turned into a kind of documentary called Collision, I think. But despite how heated they could get, they were actually friendly off stage. And I feel kind of weird referring to Christopher Hitchens as being heated, because one of the things I liked about him is that he seemed to have this relaxed confidence, like he was very at home in his own skin, and always seemed to be in control of his emotions and had this very kind of dry, witty exterior. I think I meant more, their debates were very contentious. If you could call either of them heated, it probably would have been Douglas Wilson. But yeah, now it seems Wilson, and this isn't the first time I've heard his name referenced recently. It seems like he's becoming kind of something of a prominent figure or rising star among this movement. Where we see the promotion of a harsher, less empathetic brand of Christianity. And I can't remember if I talked about it on the main show or the Patreon bonus show, but I know recently I was talking about some kind of right-wing Christian content creator or pastor who is trying to draw a distinction between compassion or feeling sorry for someone and empathy, making it seem like it's all right, to have this kind of surface level pity where, you kind of feel sorry for someone. But empathy is bad because it requires you kind of stepping into that person's shoes and maybe identifying with them too much. And then, that kind of opens you up to a kind of weakness, or, maybe they're going to drag you down with them or something like that, And it's weird because there are nuanced differences in the definitions of compassion and empathy, but they also kind of overlap. Compassion is feeling pity or sorry for someone. And empathy is kind of involves theory of mind. It's the ability to imagine, put yourself into someone else's shoes. Imagine how they must feel, and or how you would feel in their position. And then you say, wow, I wouldn't like it if that happened to me. And I don't, so I shouldn't like it when it happens to them. And once again, and like I've mentioned also recently on the show, it's kind of like the golden rule, which predates Christianity and the Bible. Don't do unto others what you wouldn't want done unto you. And to understand the golden rule, it requires empathy. You have to be able to picture what would be like to suffer what someone else is suffering. So there is that nuanced distinction. And at the same time, I don't know if you can fully separate, compassion and empathy, because I feel like empathy is a part of what breeds or allows for compassion. And what I mean by that is, I think, at least in part, it's our ability to recognize or understand another person or being's capacity for suffering and to see them in a state of suffering and misfortune that motivates us to want to help them and alleviate that suffering. And so I think it's often the case, maybe not always, that compassion is born of empathy, at least partly. And I personally think there could be a few different reasons for this kind of right-wing Christian war on empathy. I think part of it is just that they have this dark impulse or desire to dominate society at large, to impose their harsh Christian worldview on others, whether they like it or not. And then I think another component of it is or relates to the current hot button issue of immigration. And as I've mentioned on the show recently, even though I'm a pretty left-leaning guy, when it comes to immigration, I like to think I have kind of a centrist view or approach. I believe in immigration. One of the things I like about the U.S. is that we're a melting pot. But at the same time, I think we should have common sense immigration laws and policies, etc. But where my left-leaning principles and sensibilities and empathy come back into play is when it comes to how do we treat immigrants and undocumented people. To me, rounding people up and sending them off without due process to a notorious, torture prison in El Salvador isn't it? Especially when, and I've found this really deeply disturbing, when we've had at least a couple of cases of people that now even, it seems like the administration or the government is admitting, yeah, we made a mistake. We sent some people there that don't deserve to be there. There was the gay, I almost wanted to say hairdresser, but I think he was a makeup artist. And there was a father with a sick child or disabled child who, didn't have any gang affiliations. And so it seems like they've admitted that we've sent some individuals there wrongly, and yet the government shows no interest in righting the situation and getting those people out. And that's just, it's unconscionable to me. It's horrific. And that's where empathy should come into play. Any decent, normal person with even a semblance of a conscience should be able to imagine how awful it would be to be, unjustly sent to some hell pit in another country when you didn't do anything wrong. And to make it even worse, imagine no one's doing anything to get you out. And since these far-right Christians tend to have far-right politics, they tend to have a pretty harsh view of immigration. And so empathy for them is kind of an inconvenience. And then in a similar vein, I think they also have this kind of pick yourself up by your own bootstraps approach or mentality. They don't tend to like social safety net programs, etc. So once again, empathy kind of clashes with their worldview.